What is going on, everybody? My name is Jordan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in today's video, I'm going to walk through my lineup building process for the MLB 2023 season. This is the real process I've been using to build my lineups for each and every single slate. Thought this would be a good one here to record. We've put out quite a bit of MLB content already this year. We actually have a full course up on our YouTube channel talking about the fundamentals, how to select contests, how to deal with weather, how to start leveling up your game. So a lot of what you're going to see in this video I've covered elsewhere already, but I just wanted to kind of pack all of that down here and actually show how I'm using all of this information as it actually relates to building my lineups here every single day. So it is about 45 minutes or so until lock for the early slate today. So I'm actually going to be building my lineups here that I'm going to play into my contests live on this video here, talking about what I'm thinking about, what I'm doing at each step of the process here. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. So first things first, I'm going to get my entries file uploaded here. I've been playing based on my bankroll that I set out here at the start of the season, about $100 a day here. I've already entered into these contests, and I am pretty strictly following the DFS profit plan. I think this is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give to a newer player, or maybe somebody that is struggling, is to check out some of the other videos. We have one for baseball for this season. We've also got the DFS profit plan at the top of our YouTube channel. It is the best way to select contests where you are going to maximize your ability to make a profit while minimizing the massive swings to your bankroll that the high variance of DFS can sometimes create. So we have here about 140 total entries in the diversifier larger field type contests, and then another 10 entries or so in the single entry and 3 max. So let's go ahead here and bounce back to the home screen and start talking about my process. In overall, my process, I would say, is a pretty lightweight. It's an efficient process that generally takes, maybe 15 or 20 minutes max for me to do each day here. And I am generally going to let the Sims do a lot of the heavy lifting for me in terms of what players I am getting to and what ownership I want to fade versus play. And I'm just really adding value in a few specific parts of the process. So on the home screen, not going to make too many adjustments here. The main things that I'm going to be doing is, of course, just getting an idea of what the slate kind of looks like. A couple things that I think are really useful for that is I like this team stack section, and I like going over here and looking at the projected runs and sorting by that, just to get a sense of what some of the top stacks might look like, and especially teams that are over 5 runs as we get into the heat of the summer, especially teams that are over 6 runs implied total here, will give you a sense of who the best stacks are and also who's likely to be popular here. So we do see New York and Houston out in front, a couple other teams here over the 4.5 run range here. So overall, not a slate where I would expect that there is going to be one stack that is overwhelmingly the most popular stack. If there is, I'm probably going to be more on the side of fading that team. I do generally like to get an idea of what kind of the pitching context looks like as well, both in terms of projections and in terms of ownership. A couple things jumping out to me here. A lot of expensive pitchers are the highest projected pitchers here today. Sean Manaea is an interesting one that is jumping out here as an extremely cheap option that is pretty competitively listed in terms of projection here. Doesn't look like the ownership is going to be all too high on him. Christian Javier is another one that's interesting here. You're seeing kind of a big ownership discrepancy amongst some of these top pitchers here. So looks like actually it might be a good way to get different today is to get off of some of these chalkier pitchers. I'll take a look here at the pitchers too as well and see if anything's jumping out to me. But yeah, it looks like going to be probably some pretty popular multiple 10K plus pitcher type constructions on today's slate. So I could see that pushing people onto less expensive stacks overall. Sean Manaea is looks like to be one of those, that kind of value option if you want to play a more expensive stack, or Rich Hill up against the Rockies here looks like kind of your salary relief type pitchers here. So again, we'll run some builds in a minute, but just kind of like to get a sense of what the slate's looking like overall. How good are the hitting options? How good are the pitching options? What do the salary ranges look like there? Let's look at the batters real quick and see if my intuition was correct looking at those team totals. Ownership first here, Aaron Judge looking like he is going to be an extremely popular option. He's always popular on pretty much every single slate. On a slate where the Yankees are the highest run total team, it's going to be a very popular day for Aaron Judge here. We also see Houston popping up here a little bit. Yankee stack's definitely popular. San Francisco and the Dodgers, maybe to a lesser extent here, who were also some of those top teams. So definitely makes sense there. I'm going to just quickly look at the projections here, see if anybody kind of jumps out here as maybe an early opportunity to get a little different. So you do see like Miami, Arizona, and Pittsburgh in particular showing up here with just like high projected guys at some of the lower ownership there. So it might be an early way to get different. But at this stage, just familiarizing myself with the slate. In terms of what I'm actually doing on the home screen, the main thing that I'm focusing on most of the time is just setting the stack types that I want. There are quite a few different ways to do this in the app. If you want to get pretty granular, you can set a stacking rule. You can, of course, handle this all post-build, and that works just as well, too. But I know right off the bat that there's certain stacks that I'm probably just not going to play in my builds here. This is a little bit slate size dependent. We have a 9-game slate today. So what I will probably end up doing is playing everything to about 4-2 stacks here. Pretty comfortable with any of these types of constructions for my builds here in a much larger slate. So when we start talking about slates that are maybe 11 or 12 games, I might clean this up even a little bit more and really just play something like this with the idea being I don't want any more than one uncorrelated player in my builds. When the slates start getting really large, the probability of a team having a really high scoring game and being a successful 5 or a 4 stack goes up. There's also more players in the player pool, so we can rely on correlation a little bit more to give us high scoring lineups. The smaller a slate gets, the smaller the player pool is, the more likely you're going to have to be to just getting that optimal lineup, and the less likely it is that one team's going to score enough runs to be that 5-stack viable type play. So larger slate, I typically like to get more and more correlated. Smaller slate, I'm willing to get a little bit less correlated. But on a 9-game slate, kind of like a medium size, maybe to the large size slate, I would probably do something like this. And in terms of practical changes that I'm making on the home screen, that's pretty much it. I'm not doing a lot with projections or ownership here or curating a player pool or anything like that. I'm going to let the Sims handle a lot of what players I'm getting to, but I do have an opinion here on what types of lineup constructions I'm going to play. So I'm going to input that here ahead of time in this stack type section. I think this is the best way to do it here before we start building our lineups. The one other thing I forgot to mention here is that this is the part of the process where I always want to check on the weather for the day. So I like to use Kevin Roth's weather dashboard. It's on Roto Grinders here, the MLB weather dashboard. It looks like a pretty light day on weather overall. Couple games in the yellow, but it doesn't really look like there's any crazy weather here. So I'm not going to make any changes in this particular video. I do have a video up in that MLB course for the 2023 season that talks about weather in more detail and goes through some examples of what I actually do in situations where there is bad weather or games that have delay risk or postponement risk. So if you want to see a little bit more on that, go ahead and check that video out. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build some lineups. And for this baseball season, I have actually begun splitting my builds up into 2 separate builds here. So I'm going to start with my larger field, my diversifier type contests, building for basically the 150 max, which is a 150 max 10 to 50K. I have 140 lineups in those contests here. I am using the pro plan, so I'm going to build a large pool of 5,000 lineups, and I'm going to leave the other settings alone here. We'll go ahead and get this build started. The main reason I've started splitting these 2 builds up in baseball in particular here, among a couple other sports here, the main reason is, one, we have the time to do this. Most of the time you're going to have most of the starting lineups in early enough here that you generally have time to run multiple builds here. The main really value I think you get of splitting this up here is twofold. The first is that your ranking methods for the lineups that you're building in these builds is going to change based on the size of the contest. So when you have the large field contest, you're going to be weighting ownership quite a bit higher. In the smaller field contest, you're going to be weighting ownership lower. And because ownership is such an important part of baseball compared to something like NBA, I don't really want to miss out on that value of scoring the lineups correctly for the contests that they're ultimately going to get played in. The other thing is I'm pretty aggressive with the way I diversify my lineups in baseball. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And I want to make sure that my lineups are diversified amongst the contests that they're being played in. Basically, I want to make sure that my single entry and 3 max lineups are all quite a bit different from one another. They don't need to all be different from all of the lineups I'm playing in my 150 max type contests here. But I want to make sure that on a contest size basis, I'm diversified appropriately for those contests. So I have been splitting this up here. A lot of times I like to start with the diversifier builds, the 150 max, the 20 maxes, and then go into my elevator type contest, my single entry, and 3 max type contests. Within a build, the first thing I'm generally doing here is actually worrying about my diversification. I'm going to go through and do some cleanup here and make sure I'm getting exposure to teams I want to, make sure everything looks good. But I want to do that for a portfolio of lineups that resembles what I'm actually going to play. So I like to diversify first here using min uniques so I can get a sense of what my true exposures might end up being, and then I'll go through and do some fine tuning. So I recommended in other videos here to use one less than the maximum value of min uniques that is allowed, where you're still getting the number of lineups you want. I've been sticking to that quite a bit in baseball. I like playing a very diversified portfolio. The variance in baseball is just very high, so I like to get pretty diversified here. So what we will do is I'm going to basically just stress test the min uniques here and see how high I can get. So I'm just going to throw out 7 and see what that does here. So actually I was pretty close. So 7 min uniques does not allow me to get 140 lineups. It actually allows me to get 139. So I suspect that 6 min uniques is actually the maximum number of min uniques where I can get 140 lineups from my pool of 5,000. So one less than the maximum, that rule there, is going to put me at around 5 min uniques. That's probably what I'm going to play here for this build. It's a lot, and I'm comfortable with that. I like to know, again, it's a very slate size dependent thing. It's also a sim diversity dependent thing here, but I like to know that I'm playing a very diverse portion of my pool. If we scroll down and look, the last lineup, even with 5 min uniques, is only ranked 692 out of 5,000. So we're still playing lineups very much so at the top end of our pool. When it comes to actually then curating these lineups and making sure that I like the angle that we're playing here, and I like the overall just the overall setup of these lineups, I typically go right to left with stack types. Game stacks I'm not super worried about. I don't think there's a lot of reason to worry about game stacks in baseball, but I like to go right to left here. So I'll look at my stack types first, then my team stacks, then my player stacks. The main reason why I like to do this here is I think it's the kind of most macro lens first. The biggest lens of thinking about a lineup is the stack type of the lineup. Then I can look at the team stacks here, and then I can fine tune and look at some players here. The stack types in general don't typically need a lot of work because I have already curated my stack types, but I do like to generally just go through and do a quick check here, and I may sometimes do a little bit of additional just fine tuning and just cleanup here. There are some stack types here that I'm a little bit less likely to play. I'm always a little bit cautious of just these 5-1-1-1 stacks. I might go through and just take a look at these and see what the context of these are. I do love the big 5 stack, but you are playing 3 totally uncorrelated players to one another. So I'll a lot of times just go through and kind of take a quick look at these here. Things that I'm looking for, I don't like to play this particular stack type where I am filling in with a lot of players that I don't think have individual upside. So guys that are projected low or batting at the very bottom of the order or things like that. So this is a good example of maybe a lineup that I'd be a little less inclined to play. It's a Diamondbacks 5 stack here with Sosa and Vierling here, 2 kind of more value pieces. Rodriguez is a good one-off, but just the way that this lineup would be successful to me is a little bit thin because you're counting on just kind of 2 random guys towards the bottom of the order going off here. So I'll go through and kind of see if I'm getting like 30% exposure or even 15 plus exposure to this particular stack type. Sometimes I'll just end up playing it anyway. But on a night like to this, on a slate like this here, I don't hate these lineups here, but with only 9 out of 140 showing up in my pool anyway, I might experiment here with just Xing that out. Another stack type I do proceed a little bit with caution here sometimes is the 4-2, where you have 2 uncorrelated players and you're not really even getting the maximum stack value out. You're only using a 4 stack. I'm getting 10%. It matches up with my pool exposure. Feel pretty good about that. I'm okay with that here. I might end up also crossing off I'm going to leave the 4-2-2s. If I'm playing the 4-2s, I'm going to leave the 4-2-2s. So, again, you can always kind of end up reverting this. So I'm fine taking some stances here and just seeing like what happens if I eliminate that 5 stack here. But I like to look at my stack types first here. Then I'll go ahead and bounce over to this team stacks. Again, this is kind of just comparing with what my initial vision of the slate was here with what my stack exposure looks like. I'm pretty spread out. I expected that. I have a really high number of min uniques here. It's a slate where I don't think there is far and away a best stack. My stack exposure looks pretty similar to my stack pool exposure. Oftentimes an indicator for me or something I do want to look into is if the overall best stack here, so The overall best stack, according to my pool of 5,000 lineups, is Houston, with like showing up about 26% of the time. I often don't want to be way more exposed to any one stack than the stack pool exposure. So if the best overall stack is like 30%, I don't really want exposure to any one stack much higher than 30%. And the Min Unique Players does a pretty good job of that, but that is something I'm often looking into here. One other thing I will sometimes take a look at is, let's go real quick here. I want to look at these pitchers again. I will look at some of the top pitchers and see who they're playing against and see if I am getting any exposure in my pool to some of those opposing teams. So we have Texas, Milwaukee, Philly, and then particularly for cheaper pitchers here, a lot of times you end up in situations in baseball where you have a pretty low salary, maybe a decent to average pitcher against a bad team. The field tends to gravitate towards those pitchers quite a bit and assumes that the pitcher is going to be successful in that matchup. And that's not always the case. A bad team can very easily hit well against a poor pitcher, and I think the field generally leans a little bit too much on the pitcher side. So Washington and Colorado might be teams that I'm particularly interested in. So Texas, Milwaukee, Philly, Washington, and Colorado. And I'll go back to the team stacks here and kind of just keep an eye out for some of those teams here. And if I'm getting some decent exposure in my pool to those teams, I will often want to go get a little bit of exposure in my actual portfolio of lineups here, because I think there's an opportunity there. SaberSim is saying that there's upside based on the fact that these teams are showing up in my pool, and I know that I'm going to get some direct negative leverage on already chalky pitchers by getting to those teams. So it doesn't look like Texas and Milwaukee are the best options on today's slate. 3.5%, 2.7% exposure in my pool here. They're showing up a little bit, not teams that I really want to target. I am getting to Colorado at 12%, which I like quite a bit. They're showing up in my pool at 7%. Again, we're getting some direct leverage there. Philly is another team showing up in 9% of the pool. I'm getting 11%. And the last one was Washington, which it actually seems like is going to be one of my bigger stands here, showing up at 15% of my pool. I'm at 17%. And again, I really like the direction of playing some of these kinds of stacks here. It actually looks like this is a situation where the field is going to be on both sides of this game. Some exposure to Sean Manaea, but also, 10% exposure or so to Washington as well here. It makes sense if people are paying up for pitchers. A cheaper stack in a decent spot is likely going to be the way to make that work, right? 2 10K pitchers, you play 2 cheaper stacks here in this type of build. So maybe not as much of a direct negative leverage or a game theory play there, but I do like my exposure. So to kind of summarize what I'm talking about there, one of the other things that I'll look at in the team stack section is SaberSim saying to me there's upside on a team with direct negative leverage against a chalky pitcher, and can I get some exposure there? Just as kind of a hypothetical, let's say I was looking at this and Texas, for example, was actually showing up in like 6, 7, 8% of my pool, and I was getting 0. That might be an opportunity where I would actually bump up my minimum exposure to that stack to maybe match the pool exposure, just to get an opportunity to directly negatively leverage the chalkiest pitcher on the slate. This slate isn't, to be completely honest, a great example of it. I'm not really seeing many opportunities there, but a lot of times when you have a very chalky SP2 against a bad team, maybe some 6K pitcher up against the Tigers or something like that. The Tigers were money for last year. I actually banked 2 slates in consecutive days last year with this strategy where I can't even remember who the pitchers were at this point, but you had some mediocre pitcher up against the Tigers 2 nights in a row, and they went off both nights in a row, and I bumped up my exposure because SaberSim was telling me that there was some upside there. So definitely can be an opportunity there. Once I'm happy with the stack types, I'll go and bounce over and look at the players here. A lot of times, again, looking kind of at the this is an opportunity to look at the pitchers first of all, and just see how things are looking overall, what pitchers I ended up getting exposure to here. So pretty heavy on or over the field on Kershaw, and we're getting some good exposure here. Some of our top exposures are some of those guys that look like they were just a little bit under-owned based on our initial look at the slate, right? Javier, Sean Manaea here, Erod looks like a pretty decent play here as well, right? These are all kind of the guys that project very well, and look like they're going to be maybe a little bit under-owned on the slate. Taking a big stand on Luis Castillo, again, just looking at the ownership projection here versus the projection, it looks like the right play on this slate. These are pretty aggressive stands based on just looking at the leverage, but this is with 5 min unique players, right? What SaberSim is kind of basically saying to me here is that if even once you crank up your min uniques and you are getting very, very diversified, 5 min uniques in a 9-player lineup is extremely diversified. It makes sense here to play a very diversified portfolio of batters and really take our stands on ownership with the pitchers. This isn't always the case. There are some times where I will have a very aggressive diversification and I end up much higher exposed to a particular stack, and then I am pretty spread out at pitchers. But if there's going to be a big ownership discrepancy, a big ownership inefficiency on this slate, I like the way of playing this. I like playing this angle here because it looks like there is going to be one here. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable with that. One thing I do tend to like to do here is to look at the leverage and just kind of get a sense if there are any significant outliers. I actually would say that Christian Javier is a significant outlier on this slate, but this ownership just looks kind of egregious, so I'm going to take that stand. I do often end up bringing this down a little bit if I'm seeing some outliers here. So you can kind of see basically once we hit 20% exposure, 20% leverage, like around that 17-20%, it kind of levels out a little bit more and is a little bit more flat. I think there is a case to cap the maximum exposure to Javier to like maybe about 40% to bring that in, maybe 30% to bring that a little bit more in line, but I'm comfortable with taking a risk here, taking a stand on my pitchers since I'm pretty flat on my hitters overall. Take a look at the negative leverage as well and see what kind of some of the big fades are. So I think there's also similarly here an argument maybe to set a minimum exposure to Castillo of maybe 10 or 15% if you're a little bit more of a risk-averse player, but I'm gonna take this stand here and be pretty comfortable with that. Let's take a look at the batters here real quick. Batters, I am less comfortable with having a really aggressive stand or one batter or a set of batters that is really out of whack with the leverage. So I don't really want to see a significant outlier here. I'm okay taking big stands fading. So if we're fading the Yankees, I'm good with that here. But I don't want to be way over the field on any one batter here, almost on any baseball slate. So this looks good. About 20% over the field here on, who is this? Miami, Pittsburgh, some of these Dodgers stacks as well. It seems like the Dodgers might be a little under-owned relative to their run expectation. So overall, I feel pretty good about this here. So the build looks good. Again, we diversified here. We did some quick look through on our stack types, our team stacks, and players. Didn't make a lot of updates on this one, but the main things I'm trying to do at each step here is make sure I'm happy with the stack types I'm playing, make sure that I'm pretty spread out on my hitting stacks overall, and maybe look for an opportunity to get some direct negative leverage to chalky pitchers with my stacks. And then on the players, I want to just make sure that I'm comfortable. I think the right way to put it is I want to make sure I'm comfortable with what is implied by the leverage column here, both positive and negative. If Christian Javier is essentially my biggest stand on the slate, and based on the ownership projection, based on the player projection and where he fits in with the other pitchers, I'm comfortable with that. But I just want to make sure that this is a conscious decision. This is something that I'm aware of going into the slate, and if I'm not comfortable with that, I will happily here maybe bring that exposure down a little bit, just to be a little bit more in line with the field there. Okay, cool. So we've got our larger field contest here set up. The one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a name here. So I'm going to call this large field. And I am also going to save my lineup set. And this is just going to make it easier to fill when the time comes here to fill these builds. So this will be large field. And now let's go ahead and build some lineups for the smaller field. So in this case, I'm going to set this equal to a single entry here. And most of these contests are less than 1,000 entrants here for these. So I'm going to set them here. Let's see, 8, 7. Let me see here real quick what this contest list looks like again. So this one, they are kind of in between here. A little bit split between the... they're like anywhere, these contests are anywhere from like 500. I actually think this is on average, my elevator contests are a little bit more in this range. They're on the lower end of this range, but I'm fine playing with a little bit higher correlation and sim diversity here. We have 10 of them. I'm going to build another 5,000 lineups because I can, and build these lineups here now for the single entry and 3 max contest. We'll go through the process again, and I'll talk about what I'm looking at for this particular build. Okay, so again, part of the reason I'm actually splitting these up into two different builds is that I just get the value here. There's really two portions of value I'm getting here. The first is that I get to weight ownership correctly for the contest that these lineups are actually going into, and I get a little bit better value out of my diversification. I will be able to really diversify my 10 lineups out of a pool of 5,000 here and make sure that these lineups are really different from one another. So 8, 9 won't work. 9 will work. That's crazy. So what does 8 min uniques here look like? And this is going to basically be me playing lineups that are almost completely different from one another in my top lineups, which again is pretty comfortable to me here. So I'm going to leave it at 8 for now, but I'm going to make some adjustments here to my exposures and things like that, and we'll see if I can maintain 8 here. So let's go through this here. Stack types, basically I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to just be much more stringent about what I want at each step here. So I love this. I was going to say in these smaller field contests here where it's less likely to need to get the optimal, I am basically all in on stacks where I am either fully stacking up the team, 5 3s, 5 2s, or 4 3s or 4 4s. So like one off, just really big stacks for my single entry kinds of contests. In terms of the team stacks that I'm actually getting to, I will take some stands here away from what I think are going to be by far the chalkiest teams. The ownership will condense a little bit here in these smaller field contests here. So I think the Yankees in particular are going to be really popular. I think the Giants, Dodgers, and Houston are likely to be popular. They might be a little bit higher than they are in small field, but I think oftentimes the premier stack, the stack that the field thinks is by far the best team, ends up much more popular. So I'm going to full fade the Yankees here because I think that ownership is even going to be a little bit higher. I am comfortable playing Houston, San Francisco, and the Dodgers here. I think there is an argument. I would not talk you out of fading those teams pretty aggressively here, and maybe just fading them completely. I don't think it is a slate where they are going to get out of control in ownership in the single entry stuff. It feels like it's going to condense particularly around the Yankees. So feel pretty good about that. Yeah. And then let's go ahead and look at our player stacks here. And let's look at our pitchers. So 8 min uniques does put the exposure to some of these guys down a little bit more. We are still pretty much all in on Kershaw here, which I'm comfortable with. Did bring us our exposure down to Javier a little bit here, not as heavily exposed in this particular build. His ownership has actually even come down a little bit more between these two builds, so I'm even feeling better about being heavily exposed to him here in the large field stuff. So this looks pretty good here. With 10 entries, you're not going to be able to get as granular here with your leverage, just because there's less, each lineup that you're playing with a player is a 10% increase to your exposure, but I do want to just do a quick check here and again make sure that I'm comfortable with this overall. I do want to check here and see. I might bring this down. I'm okay playing this lineup here. I was going to say, actually I do want to check though. It looks like we did get a 5 stack in there, so I'm going to eliminate that. Okay, so last lineup in the pool is ranked 1240 here out of 5,000. That's still almost the top 20%. I'm comfortable with this. I would not talk somebody out of bringing this down to 7 to tighten up the bottom of the pool there a little bit, but I still feel pretty comfortable that this is one of the top overall lineups in the pool. It's in the top 20% of our pool of 5,000. Again, I play extremely diversified in MLB, and I'm comfortable with that here, sacrificing maybe a bit of lineup quality to get very different. I also like that it tends to make you pretty contrarian as well. I think in a single entry contest in particular, a Guardian stack with the Pirates double stack here, and then 2 fairly chalky pitchers here is just going to be an extremely uncommon construction here. So I like this one quite a bit. So feeling pretty good about this build overall. I am going to now go ahead here and call this my small field contest. And save this. And small field. And now we will go ahead and get these entered. So we will fill our entries here. So first things first, let's do the large field stuff here. So let's do this. And we'll grab the large field. And I'm just going to do unique random fill. And then we will uncheck there and grab these ones. And we'll do the small field and unique random. So everything looks good here. I'll go ahead and recheck everything so I can download all of my entries. Download and open DraftKings. And we will upload. And that is it. That's about exactly what my process here looks like on most of these slates here. The next thing I would actually do is go in and get a sense of what lineups do I need to wait for. So it does look like most of the afternoon games here, we are still waiting for lineups here. So we do need to keep an eye out. I'm going to set an alarm for basically about 1:30, 1:25 my time here, and check in once these starting lineups start to come out. When they start to come out, the main thing I want to do is I want to come back here and I want to look for the red lightning bolt. If the red lightning bolt is on, it means a player that is in my lineups is now not in the starting lineup for one of these teams. If it is a hitter, I will click this and I will look and see who the player is. If it is a hitter, I have pretty much gotten in the habit of doing a quick swap 100% of the time, where I am first quick swapping to do the best available player from the same team, and then if there are still lineups that don't get swapped, then swapping those with best available, downloading, and uploading. The player projections for hitters in baseball are all close enough, even amongst players on the same team, that I'm generally comfortable sacrificing a bit of projection to maintain the correlation of my stacks, so I feel pretty good about that. If we do end up in a situation where a pitcher gets scratched, to me that shifts the slate enough that I'm probably going to end up doing a late swap rebuild. I will go back in here and I will run a late swap and I will rebuild my lineups with the new sims now with that pitcher getting scratched. It just ends up in a situation where a lot of times you have the opposing team stack is probably in a little bit better of a spot. You certainly want to get off of that pitcher, and it's a little bit easier to just rebuild the lineup completely once you're taking a pitcher out. And just want to make sure that I'm building the best lineups possible to account for pitchers getting scratched. Doesn't happen too often. I think it's happened a couple times this season already here, but I will run the late swap build if a pitcher gets scratched. So I will be checking back in at around 140 to make sure, actually 130 to make sure that everything's in. I will check then as well at around that time to make sure all of the starting lineups are in. They probably should be at that point. So that is the last thing I'm doing. So just to quickly kind of summarize again the process overall on the home screen, the main thing that I'm doing is, one, spending some time to get familiar with the slate and looking at some of the best plays, some of the higher owned plays, and setting my stack types that I want to play and am willing to play in my contests here. I'm running two different builds. I'm splitting up my smaller field and my larger field contests here so I can diversify those lineups from each other for the contests that they're going to be entered in and take advantage of the different Saber score that weights ownership differently between those two contests. In a build, I'm playing extremely diversified, where I am using the one less than the maximum value I can for min uniques, and generally in the larger field contests, getting to 4 to 6 min unique players. In the smaller field contests, sometimes getting completely unique lineups or very close to completely unique lineups. And then I like to kind of go through and do some fine-tuning of my lineups right to left here, making sure that I like my stack types, then that I like my team stacks, especially looking for opportunities to get direct negative leverage against chalky pitchers, and then looking at my players here, making sure that I am comfortable with what is implied by the stand of the leverage column here, and if not, bringing that exposure down a little bit closer so there is less of an outlier here. Overall, that is the process. It's been working for me so far this season. I'm actually off to a pretty hot start this year. If you have any questions for me about this, you can always reach out in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. And in the meantime, thank you all for watching and good luck.